The subjects were political prisoners captured during World War II. And before starting the experiment, they were told that at the end of 30 days, the survivor would be freed. The purpose of the experiment was to determine how long a person could go without sleep and what effect it would have on them. There was enough food and water in the room for 5 people for a month. In addition, the room was constantly supplied with stimulating gas and oxygen to keep the subjects awake. Everything went well for the first 5 days, but then things would change. The prisoners stopped talking to each other and started whispering into microphones. After 9 days, one subject started screaming and continued to do so for hours. Then, the screams of the second subject were heard. The other 3 subjects covered the small observation windows with pages of books while whispering into the microphones. Then, the screams stopped completely. This silence lasted for days. When the researchers finally decided to enter the room to see what was going on, they were told, "We don't want to be free anymore." The Russian sleep experiment, the authorities decided to end the experiment, and when they entered, they found a horrible scene. One of the subjects was dead. The floor was covered in blood. The food was almost untouched, and the others were, so to speak, dehumanized. Their skin was torn to shreds and their internal organs were visible. The authorities, recovering from the shock, tried to get them out, but they refused. During this struggle, one of the soldiers and one of the subjects died, while another soldier had his testicles ripped off. The 3 survivors were taken to medical centers and tried to be treated, but they all wanted to stay awake and insisted on receiving more stimulant gas. One of the subjects fell asleep days later under anesthesia and never woke up. Another subject smiled several times during surgery, and one of the nurses heard him say, "Keep cutting." Despite all this, the military official ordered the researchers to lock the 2 subjects back in the room and was shot by the researcher he ordered. Thinking that this experiment had already exceeded its purpose, the researcher then killed the subjects. But before killing the subject who could still talk, he did not neglect to ask him what happened. The answer he received from the subject, starting with, "Did you forget so easily? We are you," was as frightening as the subject himself. When my brother and I were little, our family moved to a lovely farmhouse. We were going to stay there for 7-8 months because of my father's work. But that was no problem for us because both my brother and I loved playing in that house. There was a big green field outside, and the house was full of old things and lots of things to pass the time. Besides all that, our favorite part of the house was the kind ghost there. My brother and I named her Anne because of her kindness and compassion. Anne must have thought a lot about us because when we woke up in the morning, there was always a glass of milk on our bedside tables. She would also sit on the old chair in the living room and watch us while we played games or watched TV, sometimes even bringing the chair to the center of the room. The mother was with us at every moment, protecting us and looking after us. Or so we thought. Years later, I stumbled upon a photograph of the farmhouse where we were staying in an old newspaper and started reading the article. The caption under the photo of the woman we called Mother showed that she was a widow, that she had killed her 2 children by poisoning their milk and then committed suicide by hanging herself in the middle of the living room. And judging from the photo, the chair she climbed on to kill herself was the same chair she used to sit on and watch us while we played. The basement was off limits. This had always been the case, and the boy refused to break his mother's prohibition because he never disobeyed his mother. But one day he could no longer resist the noises coming from the basement and decided to go downstairs. After all, his mother was outside mowing the lawn, and he could play a little with the little dog in the basement. And maybe the dog was hungry. After all, it had been barking like crying for days. Taking some milk with her, she went down to the basement and opened the locked door. It was very dark down there, and the dog made no sound. When he went a little further inside, his eyes got used to the darkness and began to pick out objects around him. As he was holding his breath and looking around, a pair of hands grabbed him from behind and pulled him out. Unable to understand what had happened, the boy saw his mother looking at him angrily. He went up to his room, promising his mother, who was very angry and yelling at him for the first time, that he would never go down there again. And so, as not to anger his mother again, he could not talk about the dog noises he had heard, nor about the boy in the basement without hands and feet.